So in this video, I am going to talk to you about why art education has over the decades and continues to struggle for funding and respect in public education. Why is that? Why does art education need to continue to defend itself? It's not what you think it is. Why are so many programs fighting for scraps regarding funding so they can buy supplies for the kids to use? And this varies to a local art teacher where I live who has zero budget and she has to write grants to get funded, to, of course, other schools in more affluent areas who have a higher budget. But why is it so unpredictable? To answer this question, art education as a field and art educators and those who love and advocate for the arts in schools, which, by the way, we all appreciate that, but you need to understand that art education does not exist in a bubble. It exists in the larger scope of public education. And public education does not exist for the hell of it. Public education exists within our nation. And the point is to continually graduate citizens that can contribute to the economic well-being of our nation. To understand why this is important, you have to understand art's place in education within history. So I'm going to take you back a few decades and speed you forward to today. Don't zone out. I promise you this will be quick and painless, but you need to know the whole picture so you can understand why you're fighting for funding in your school. So let's go back to the Cold War era. For you guys that are a little rough on your history, the Cold War involved two main superpowers, the US and the Soviet Union. Now in the middle of this, you had the space race happening in the 50s, which is exactly what it sounds like. The space race was about economic and military superiority to protect and defend against the other superpower. And the way that they were going to do that was to be the first to get into space. So it is a race with implications for national security, the possibility of nuclear war. There's a lot at stake here during the 1950s. But in 1957, the Soviet Union beats the US to space. They launch Sputnik. It's the first satellite into Earth orbit. A year later, the US responds and launches their own satellite into space. A couple of years after that, the Soviets put a man in orbit, so they beat us again. But then a few years later, in 1969, the US puts a man on the moon. Okay, so you're probably thinking, what does this have to do with art education? Paralleling this space race, you have things that are going on within the Department of Education. The US is concerned with making sure that American students can compete academically with Soviet students. So they're putting pressure on the Department of Education. And that funnels down. Then you have educational reforms spurred on by the National Science Foundation, which pushed for hands-on science labs in schools. This is why you have those science labs in school today. All right? During this time, NASA's budget was increased 500% because so much is going into the space race, and they need the scientists and the minds and the money to continue to compete on the world stage. And they need education to accept that responsibility and make sure that schools are producing students that are academically superior in key areas, math and science. Okay, now let's move on to the 70s. In the 70s, we have an economic downturn in the US, and this downturn is blamed on the schools. The consensus was that schools were failing to equip students to contribute to the nation's economic welfare. Art's not in here. We need jobs, we need people creating jobs, we need people that are smart enough and educated enough to succeed in those jobs. Art's not in there. Not in the big picture. And because of this, the arts and funding for the arts is at the discretion of individual states. You keep going through the 80s and 90s, and art education in schools was scarce. In the 80s, another massive wave of school reforms come, and the U.S. Department of Education produces a damning report titled A Nation at Risk, which condemns education and says we as a nation are literally at risk of failing if our schools don't improve. Going right into the 90s, you have most states adopting outcome-based education. Congress sets goals for standards to be met by the year 2000. Those goals are not met. Then, in early 2000, George Bush signs the No Child Left Behind Act into law. This immediately mandated that educational standards were set for science, math, and reading, not art, because all of this is situated within the larger picture of the national economy and national security. Going from the 90s into the 2000s into today, you have the significant rise of importance of standardized testing, which I think is standardized testing has failed education. That is another video. Okay, so moving along, you have standardized testing. Now, because of the law of No Child Left Behind, funding is tied to schools meeting those standards. What does that mean for art education? For you guys that have not zoned out on me and are still with me through this rapid fire history report, it does affect the arts because schools know that to get funding, they have to have test results that show that they're meeting or exceeding the standards for key subject areas, science, math, reading, not art. So what do? That's where their funding goes. That's where their focus goes, that's their priority, and if a child is underperforming in any of these key areas, they might pull them out of art class so they can get some extra tutoring or extra help in a key area. Why do they pull them out of art? They're not going to pull them out of science to go get help in math. No, because that's a key area. They pull them out of art because at no point over the decades has art been shown statistically to contribute to national security and the national economy. Now, during this time, and this is where the art education problem comes from, paralleling the waves of educational reform in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, you have the J. Paul Getty Trust in the 80s formulates discipline-based art education. The purpose of this was to save art education by showing that it was a field with standards, just like math, science, and reading. And it established a structural framework that paralleled the other subjects. Now, within discipline-based art education, the reason it's called that is because it specified 4 disciplines that were being covered. Just like within the language arts, you have spelling and reading and writing. In discipline-based art education, you're going to have art history, art criticism, aesthetics, which involves the philosophy and nature of the meaning of art, and art production. So art was a subject unto itself, and it was valid and parallel to these other serious subjects. And that is why these things are still such a priority in most of today's art education degree programs, art education textbooks, and art lesson planning, and the national art standards. That's where that comes from, and that's why it is the way it is. So now, starting in the 2000s, you have the rise of STEM. That's an acronym that stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. This acronym was coined at an interdisciplinary meeting at the National Science Foundation. Sounding familiar yet? And what's the point of STEM? The point of STEM was to improve our national competitiveness in the fields of science and math. Why? Why is that important? The reasons haven't changed. If anything, we're consistent. The goal was to champion STEM in education that could serve as a pipeline to funnel students into these key degree programs. The implications are for these specific fields because these fields lie on the cutting edge of technical advancement, which in turn funnels into economic advancement, which in turn funnels into national security. It's all tied together. And don't forget about space. We have satellites that are watching everybody. We have to be able to produce graduates that can funnel into those fields and continue to keep us at the top. Where's art? Art's not in there. Where's art? So there, no, it's not. Where's art? But art education, but it's important. We love art, art matters. But the minds that are at the top, the people that make the decisions, policy and curriculum and funding, are not looking at how you feel about art. They're looking at what's going to get them the most bang for their buck in terms of education. And that means their priority is on those key subject areas. That hasn't changed since the 50s. It continues to be the focus, and I don't see that focus going away anytime soon. So what are the arts to do? What do? We're not going to just go away, right? What are we going to do? So I Googled, why are the arts important in education? I got everything ranging from it reduces the dropout risk, improves student attendance, to giving students a place to express themselves, to improving fine motor skills, to offering opportunities for collaboration, and my favorite, creativity. Now, think about that and think about the things that the decision makers value. Their priority is not on happy learning environments and hands-on experiences with different media and art history or the vocabulary. Their priority is not on these things. But art still trying to to stay in the game here. It's like, coach, let me play, please, let me play. I'm not gonna drop the ball this time. So what do? They put the A in STEM. We're STEAM now, not STEM, because this is science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, because we're relevant, right? But yay for plugging the arts in there. And the reason why is because they're saying, well, it's already in there. They're making stuff in science, they're doing those projects, they're constructing things. That's art. It's already got an art component in it. No, not necessarily, because remember, if your school or your art teacher is adhering to a discipline-based art education, that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about artists, art history, art techniques, art vocabulary, the meaning of art, criticizing art, analyzing fine art. That's not what they're doing in STEM. STEM involves a group of students that are actively trying to problem solve, but it has relevant real-world applications. It's not just how to problem solving to make your clay pot not explode in the kiln. It's a different type of problem solving. What does that mean for art education? It means that art education needs to be triaged. And that is another video. This video was to explain the problem to you, where it originates from, and why art education continues to be in danger. Because the skills needed for success in the 21st century, collaboration, creative thinking, critical thinking, communication, questioning, all of those things are cognitive. They're not related directly to the old focus of discipline-based art education, which is art as its own subject. So for art to survive, it needs to remember that it exists within a larger sphere of education and the nation. And to do that, it needs to recognize that those lessons of art for learning about art are not relevant for success in today's world. It's not that I'm saying that art is never important and the study of art isn't important. I'm saying that when it comes to taxpayer dollars and funding and earning and keeping the respect and validity within the larger realm of education, art needs to adapt, modify, and grow, and they need to do it explicitly. It's not enough to just say, well, we have creativity in art. Not necessarily. If your students are all drawing a still life, that's not creativity. That is practicing technical skill. If your students are drawing Monet's bridge, that's not practicing creativity. That is technical skill. Remember, just because you're making art doesn't mean you're thinking creatively. So I'm going to leave you with that thought, but I want to let you know that I'm going to continue to make videos that show you, the art teacher, how to move into a more relevant practice within your own school system. So hit subscribe, the bell, don't miss any of my videos, like it, share it with your administrators, share it with parents, share it with other art teachers you know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.